The wind had teeth that morning. Dust bit at Eliza Dorn's cheeks as she pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Beside her, little Jude stumbled, his cough sharp and dry, echoing down the empty road that led into Briar Hollow. They looked out of place from the moment they crossed the boundary stone. Eliza's once cream dress had turned a tired brown, the hem frayed and stiff with old mud. Her boots, too big for her, scuffed along the gravel as she dragged a wooden hand cart with everything they had left: a cracked pot, a folded quilt, a Bible wrapped in cloth, and a sack of Jude's clothes, most of them too small now. The boy held her hand tightly, his pale face flushed with fever. He couldn't have been more than 6, but already his eyes had the watchfulness of someone. As they approached the town square, Eliza straightened her spine, forcing her chin up. People watched. Men leaning outside the general store paused their tobacco spits. A pair of women hanging laundry paused mid-snap. The swinging doors of the saloon creaked open just enough for someone inside to mutter, "Ain't that the Dorn woman?" She tried not to flinch, the name still stung. She walked to the church first, hoping the Lord's house still offered mercy. But when she knocked, the pastor's wife peeked out from behind the heavy door and narrowed her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "We don't house strangers." "I'm not a stranger," Eliza whispered. "My husband was Micah Dorn. He fought in the war with—" "I know who he was," the woman snapped. "And I heard how he died." The door closed with finality. They tried the hotel next. Eliza offered to sweep floors in exchange for a room. The owner shook his head. "You got no husband and no money," he said plainly. "You'll only bring trouble." When she asked to buy bread at the general store, the clerk stared at her hand, holding a single coin, then looked at Jude and simply said, "We're closed." It wasn't closed. By noon the sun bore down mercilessly, and Jude's cough had worsened. He hadn't eaten in a day and a half. Eliza found a shady spot behind the feed store and sat on a wooden crate, cradling her son. His small fingers clutched at her sleeve as if he sensed she was coming apart. She wiped his brow with the edge of her shawl. "Just a little longer, sweetheart," she murmured, even though she didn't know what she meant by it. A group of boys passed by, laughing and kicking dust. One of them, older and cruel-eyed, pointed. "That the widow who married a thief," he shouted to no one in particular. Another voice from an unseen porch answered, "Serves her right, shouldn't have come back here after what he did." Eliza looked down, her face burning. She didn't cry. She'd run out of tears a long time ago. She led Jude behind the butcher's shop, where a pile of unused crates and broken barrels leaned against a lopsided shed. They crawled into a hollow space between the wood, dry and musty. There was no roof, but it blocked the wind. That night the boy shivered in her arms while stars blinked overhead. Coyotes howled in the distance. Eliza pressed her lips to his temple and prayed in silence. She didn't see the figure watching from the edge of the alley. Tall, still, arms crossed over a dusty coat. He stayed silent, just stared, and when he vanished, no one heard his boots on the dirt. The night dragged on like a wounded animal, slow and restless. Eliza didn't sleep. Not really. She held Jude against her chest, inside the hollow behind the butcher's shop, listening to every crack of wind, every bark from a distant dog, every shifting board beneath them. Jude burned with fever. She pressed her hand to his cheeks, then his chest, still breathing, still here. The stars blinked indifferently above. By dawn frost painted the edges of the crates, and Eliza's fingers had gone numb from holding him so long. She stirred when she heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, scraping gravel. Her breath caught, but they didn't stop near her shelter. They moved past, then a soft thump. Later, when Jude stirred, coughing hard into her shawl, she noticed something resting just outside the gap, a folded wool blanket. Not new, but warm and thick. Someone had left it without a word. Eliza looked both ways from the crate's edge. No one, just empty alleys and a cat slinking past the church fence. She wrapped Jude in the blanket. "You see," she said softly, "there's still good in this place. Someone's watching over us." But she didn't believe it. Not really. That morning, she walked the boy out of the alley, shielding his eyes from the sun. A woman passed them with a basket and crossed the street instead of walking near. By mid-morning, Eliza found a patch of sun against the wall of the livery stable. She laid Jude down and tried to braid his hair the way she used to, before everything fell apart. His scalp was hot, and he winced at her touch. A horse snorted behind her. She turned. The man was tall, wore a long brown coat with dust and sun-bleached folds. His hat was low over his eyes, and he held a canteen in one hand. Without saying a word, he knelt and handed her the canteen. Eliza hesitated. "I don't take charity," she said. The man didn't respond, just waited. Jude coughed behind her. She gave it. She poured a little into her palm and cooled the boy's lips, then let him sip, then drank herself. "Thank you," she whispered, but when she looked up, the man was gone. She saw his boots turning the corner of the saloon, silent as a ghost. By noon, the heat came down hard. Eliza knocked on the back door of the boarding house, offering to clean laundry or scrub floors. "Not hiring," the cook grunted, slamming the door. She circled back toward the mercantile. There, on the porch, stood the same man. He leaned against the post, arms folded, eyes hidden beneath the brim. Inside the store, the shopkeeper, a sour man named Lowell, pretended not to see her until the stranger stepped forward. Lowell froze. "I just need bread," Eliza said. "For my boy." Lowell glanced nervously at the man behind her. "I suppose I could. Look, I don't want trouble." Eliza frowned. "I'm not here to make trouble." "You're not," Lowell said. "He might be." The stranger said nothing, but his shadow stretched across the counter like a warning. The shopkeeper quickly bagged bread, a wedge of cheese, even 2 apples. He handed it over without charging. Eliza blinked. I don't have." "It's fine," Lowell stammered. "Just take it." She turned to thank the man, but he was already walking away. "Wait," she called. He didn't. Jude, sitting on the steps with the blanket still wrapped around him, smiled. "Who is he, Mama?" he asked softly. She didn't know, but something in her bones stirred. Not fear, something older than fear. Recognition. The stranger didn't come back that afternoon or the next. Eliza told herself it didn't matter, that his silence meant nothing, that men like him passed through towns like this all the time, leaving dust in their wake and no names behind. Still, she kept watching the corners of streets, the darkened porches, the silhouettes in alleyways. Briar Hollow remained cruel. She took Jude to the riverbank just outside town to wash his face and cool his fever with damp cloths. His color improved slightly, but he hardly spoke. That had given him a moment of energy, enough to walk beside her on the return. But the minute they crossed back into town, a rancher spat near her boots and muttered, "Beggar woman." Eliza kept her head high. "Hold on to my hand," she told her son. "I always do," he whispered. 2 more days passed. The townspeople didn't change, but they didn't throw rocks either. That, she counted as mercy. One evening, as the sun melted into the hills, Eliza returned to the livery stable to offer help mucking out stalls. She hadn't earned a coin yet, but maybe sweat would buy them standing. Inside the barn, the smell of hay and horses comforted her more than the church ever had. That's when she saw him again. The stranger. He stood in the far corner, brushing down a tall black gelding. The way he moved was quiet, deliberate, and full of memory. He hadn't seen her yet. She considered leaving, but Jude had already stepped inside. "Sir," the boy called softly. The man turned. It was the first time Eliza saw his full face. Scarred, one long line over his left eyebrow, sun-leathered, skin, eyes like smoke, gray and unreadable. Jude took a few careful steps closer. "Thank you for the apples," he said. The man tilted his head, then surprisingly crouched down. "You don't owe me nothing," he said, voice low and rough like it hadn't been used in days. "You're not from here, are you?" Jude asked. "No." Eliza stepped between them. "Come back here, Jude." The man rose, tall still. "He didn't mean anything by it," she added quickly. "He's just grateful. We both are." The man nodded once. "Folks in this town treat you like ghosts. They treat us worse than ghosts," she said before realizing she'd spoken aloud. He didn't flinch. Then he extended a calloused hand. "Nash." She hesitated. "Eliza Dorn." He nodded again. That was all. That night, Jude slept beside a small fire behind the livery, belly full from the store scraps Nash had somehow arranged. Eliza sat with her knees drawn to her chest, watching Nash feed the flames with old splinters. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. He didn't answer right away, finally. "Because your husband saved my life." Her breath caught. "You knew Micah?" Nash nodded once. "Long time ago. War. He pulled me out of a trench and carried me on his back 3 miles through hell." Eliza looked at the fire. "People here, they say he was a thief, that he died running from the law." "They're wrong," Nash said simply. "Why didn't you come sooner?" she asked. "I didn't know he was gone when I heard I came." He tossed another stick into the fire. Sparks leapt. "I owe him," he added. Jude stirred, murmuring in sleep. Eliza looked across the flames at Nash. He didn't smile, didn't soften, but his presence was steady. That night, as the town slept, something shifted. She didn't know what to call it yet, but she no longer felt alone. The days turned warmer, though spring hadn't quite touched Briar Hollow. Nash came and went without warning. He spoke little, worked less, and lingered just long enough for people to notice and talk. The whispers began by the third morning. "That's Nash Callahan," someone muttered near the blacksmith's. "Thought he was dead." "No, just dangerous." Eliza heard it all while scrubbing linens behind the Widow Briar's boarding house. It was the only place that would give her work. 3 cents a day, enough to buy stale bread and a piece of soap. "He's bad news, Mrs. Dorn," the widow warned her, drying her hands. "You don't want to be near him. I don't think he's the one people should be afraid of," Eliza said quietly. Briar frowned but said nothing more. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Nash brought Jude a small knife with a bone handle. "For whittling," he said. Eliza looked at the blade, then at him. "Isn't he a bit young?" Nash kneeled beside Jude. "You carve wood, not hurt people." "Understood," Jude nodded solemnly. Nash stood. "Micah taught me when I was about his age." That name again, Micah. She hadn't spoken it aloud in weeks. "Did you know him well?" she asked. Nash stared out at the hills before answering. He was the kind of man who kept his word even if it killed him. Eliza swallowed hard. "That's not what the sheriff says." Nash's eyes narrowed. "Sutter," she nodded. "He's the reason I left this town 15 years ago." Nash didn't like men who didn't bow to him. "What happened?" Nash didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter, edges worn, ink faded. "I was supposed to give this to you," he said. "If Micah died." Eliza's hands trembled as she unfolded. "My dearest Eliza, if you're reading this, it means I didn't come home. I knew the risks when I went to face Sutter and his men. They've been stealing from the Veterans Fund, and I couldn't let that go, even if it meant my name would be smeared. If anything happens to me," I asked Nash Callahan to find you. "You might not remember him, but he saved my life once, and I trust him to protect what matters. You and Jude are what matters. With all my love, Micah." She read it twice before her eyes blurred, then folded it against her chest. Nash didn't speak. Eliza wiped her face and looked at him. "They lied about him. They let everyone believe he was a thief." Nash nodded. "They needed someone to blame." The next morning, a new sign hung outside the sheriff's office. "Wanted, Nash Callahan dead or alive. $500 reward." Eliza stood in the street staring at it, her son's hand in hers. People passed by quickly, eyes averted. Sutter stood on the porch of the jailhouse, arms folded, watching her reaction. "Didn't take long for him to find you," he said. "Sniffs out widows like a hound." She didn't respond. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You let him stay near that boy, you'll regret it. He's a killer, not a protector." Eliza met his gaze without flinching. "He's already done more for us than this whole town put together," she said. Sutter smirked. "He won't be around long." She turned and walked away, but inside her heart thundered. She knew now why Micah had trusted Nash, and why Sutter feared him. By the time Eliza returned to the stable that evening, word of the wanted poster had spread like wildfire. Even the horses seemed uneasy. She found Nash leaning against a post, sharpening a knife slowly, the rhythmic scrape of metal on stone steady and unhurried. Jude sat nearby, carving a crooked stick with the small whittling knife Nash had given him, tongue pressed into his cheek in concentration. Eliza held up the folded poster, creased from where she'd gripped it too tightly. "You knew this would happen." Nash didn't stop sharpening. "I've had that bounty on me before. Sutter just made it public now." She stepped closer. "He's trying to run you out of town. I figured as much. Are you going to leave?" Nash finally looked up. "Do you want me to?" Jude glanced up from his carving, eyes wide and waiting. Eliza hesitated. "No, but I don't want you shot in the street either." Nash sheathed the knife, stood slowly. "He won't come at me straight. Men like him never do." Later that night, Eliza sat beside Nash near the fire pit behind the livery. The wind carried the scent of dust and distant cattle. She unfolded Micah's letter again, rereading the same lines for the 10th time. She handed it to Nash. "He trusted you more than anyone." Nash stared at the words, his mouth a firm line. "He was the only man I knew who never took a bribe, never stepped on the weak." Eliza hugged her knees. "And now everyone thinks he was a coward." Sutter made sure of that. Nash dead. He needed to bury the story, so he buried Micah's name. He said Micah died robbing a payroll wagon. Nash shook his head. "He died trying to expose Sutter's men for stealing from war widows." Eliza's throat tightened. "They threatened him," Nash continued. "Told him if he said anything they'd ruin him. When he went public anyway, they chased him out and shot him in the back." Called it justice. Eliza looked away, tears burning her eyes. I found his body myself, Nash added quietly. Buried him where the grass still grows green. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Eliza asked, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because the town wouldn't have listened. They only see what Sutter lets them see." The next morning, Eliza tried to buy milk at the store. Lowe refused her, glancing nervously toward the sheriff's office. "Not good for business," he muttered. Outside, someone had scrawled "Gunman's whore" on the side of the stable in charcoal. She spent the afternoon scrubbing it off with a wet rag, her arms aching, jaw clenched. Nash watched from a distance but didn't interrupt. He knew better. That evening she walked into the saloon for the first time. The room went silent. She spotted Sutter at a corner table drinking with 3 ranch hands and a gambler. "You think killing Micah made you safe?" she said, her voice flat but loud enough. Sutter laughed. "Careful, widow. That's slander. You took everything from him," she said. "And now you want to take the one man who stood by him." Sutter stood, grinning. "You don't know who Nash Callahan really is." "I know who you are," she said. One of the ranch hands rose, but before he could take a step, Nash walked through the swinging doors, slow and steady. He didn't speak, just stood beside Eliza. His hand hovered near his belt, not touching his revolver, just reminding everyone it was there. Sutter held his grin, but it faltered around the edges. "Come on, Abby," Nash said. "This place stinks." She followed him out. No one stopped them, but the town was shifting. The air now carried something new, not fear, not hate, but warning. Briar Hollow woke to a different silence the next day. Not the usual indifference, not the hush of early chores. This was a thick, waiting kind of silence. The kind that follows a lightning strike when the air holds its breath for thunder. The wanted poster still hung outside the sheriff's office, but someone had scratched through Nash's name with a knife. Jude noticed it first. "Mama, does that mean he's not wanted anymore?" Eliza glanced at it, then at the people watching her from porches and windows. "No, honey," she said softly. "It means someone's not afraid of him anymore." That afternoon she brought Jude into town to visit the preacher's wife, hoping to find some cloth to mend his coat. The woman answered the door, looked Eliza up and down, and said only, "I think it's best you don't come back here." Jude's hand tightened in hers. They turned to go, but behind them a child inside the house asked, "Mama, was that the bad lady?" Eliza didn't cry. Not this time. Not anymore. When they reached the center of town, she saw Nash standing outside the general store, arms folded, watching a group of men loiter near the saloon. One of them spat in his direction, but didn't speak. Nash didn't move. Jude tugged Eliza's hand. "Mama, can I go to him?" She nodded, unsure why her throat had tightened so suddenly. The boy ran across the dusty street straight to Nash, and without hesitation, hugged his leg. Nash looked down, one brow lifting. "What's that for? You're the only one who don't treat us like dirt," Jude said. "Mama says you protect us like Daddy would have." Nash's jaw tensed, and for a long moment he didn't speak. Then, loud enough for the townsfolk to hear, he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and looked straight across the street, toward the saloon, the sheriff's office, the preacher's porch. "Take care of your mother, Nash," said voice. "Steady." Jude nodded proudly. Nash turned slightly toward the crowd gathering along the boardwalks and storefronts, eyes scanning faces that had mocked, whispered, or turned away. Then, in a voice clearer than any church bell, he said, "She's my mother too." The town froze. People stopped mid-step. A man dropped his coffee tin. A woman gasped behind gloved fingers. Even the horses seemed to still. No one knew what to do with those words, because they weren't just protective, they were claiming, as if the feared gunslinger of half a dozen territories had drawn a line in the dirt and dared anyone to cross it. Inside the sheriff's office, Sutter was watching from the window, his lip curled. "Bastard's gone soft," he muttered. One of his deputies, younger and nervous, shifted in the corner. "You want us to do something?" Sutter slammed a hand on the desk. "Yeah, we're gonna remind this town who runs it." Outside, Nash crouched to meet Jude's eyes. "You're a good boy," Jude smiled. "Will you stay?" Nash didn't answer. Eliza walked over, slow and measured. Her voice trembled, but not with fear. "You didn't have to say that," she said. He straightened. They needed to hear it. She looked around the town. Heads turned away, but she could feel for the first time, they weren't invisible or alone. "You just made us a target," she whispered. Nash nodded. Let him come. Briar Hollow hadn't seen a duel in nearly 5 years, but now the town was holding its breath, waiting, watching, whispering behind windows and behind. Nash Callahan had declared the widow his own, in front of God and everyone else. No legal papers, no ceremony, just a sentence spoken like a verdict. And the sheriff couldn't let it stand. That night, Nash didn't stay at the livery or behind the butcher. He set up camp just outside town by the hollow cottonwoods near the old trail. Said it was safer that way. Eliza knew what he meant. He cooked beans over the fire and watched the trees while Jude slept beside the flames. You should be careful, she told him, arms wrapped tight around herself. They're not just talking. Sutter's gathering men. Nash didn't answer, he just kept sharpening the same knife. Slow and thoughtful. Why don't you leave while you can, she asked. Because he wants me to. The next morning, 3 men rode into town, ranch hands from the next county over. They weren't just passing through, Sutter had sent for them. Eliza saw them ride by the mercantile, their guns worn low and their eyes scanning for one face. Nash. Inside the general store, folks whispered louder now. He's daring Sutter. He'll get her killed too. Can't say I blame him. She's stronger than she looks. The last one gave Eliza pause. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged her in weeks without venom. That afternoon, Nash walked into the blacksmith's and asked for one thing, an old horseshoe, bent just so. The blacksmith, a man named Ellis, who had kept his nose out of things until now, looked at him and asked, "You planning on sticking round?" Nash nodded once. Ellis handed him the iron. "Then I'll pretend I didn't see you." Eliza sat with Jude on the church steps that evening, even though the doors remained locked to her. The boy leaned against her shoulder. "Mama," he whispered, "do you think he'd stay if we asked him to?" She brushed hair from his face. "Some men don't need to be asked. They just do what's right." A long pause. "Is he going to get shot?" She closed her eyes. "I don't know." Inside the saloon, Sutter sat with the 3 hired guns laying out the plan. They'd corner Nash near the cottonwoods, make it look like self-defense. Town would grumble. Sure, but no one would cry, "He ain't from here." One of them said, "No one's gonna miss him." Sutter grinned. Exactly. That night, Nash sat by the fire again, back to a tree, rifle across his knees. He didn't sleep. Eliza came after sunset, wrapped in her shawl, lips tight. "They're coming for you," she said. "I know. Why don't you run?" Nash looked at her. "Because if I run, they'll come for you next." She sat beside him. "You barely know us." He didn't look away. "Micah knew. You. That's enough." The silence stretched heavy with meaning. Eliza blinked quickly, her voice thick. "He would have been proud of you." Nash looked into the fire. "I hope so." Somewhere in the dark, a twig snapped. He didn't reach for his rifle, yet, he just waited. The ambush came just before dawn. Nash had moved the fire low almost. 2 embers. He sat with his back against a tree, hat low over his brow, rifle resting loose but ready across his lap. He heard them before he saw them. 3 sets of boots, slow through the underbrush, too cautious to be hunters. He didn't move, didn't breathe heavy. He waited. The first man came from the west, creeping behind a scrub oak, revolver in hand. Nash recognized him from the saloon, the one with the nervous eyes and a twitchy jaw. The second circled wide to the north. The third stepped on a dry branch. Snap. Nash stood, not fast, not loud but certain. The 3 men froze, caught like deer under a lantern. The one with the twitch raised his gun too late. Crack. Nash's shot dropped into one knee. Not dead, just bleeding through the shoulder. The other 2 panicked. One fired blindly and hit nothing but bark. The third turned to run. Nash moved, like water, silent, relentless. He knocked one down with a blow to the gut, kicked the pistol away, and turned to the last. The man who had run was already gone, vanished into the scrub, likely heading back to Sutter with fear in his throat. Eliza heard the shots from town. She was already up, boiling water for tea she couldn't afford, hands trembling. Jude sat on the floor, wide-eyed. "Mama," she pulled him close. "Stay inside." She grabbed Micah's old coat and ran barefoot through the quiet streets, heart pounding against her ribs. When she reached the hill, Nash was crouched beside the man he'd shot. "Don't kill me," the man gasped. "Please, I got kids." Nash didn't respond, just stood and walked away, leaving him groaning in the dirt. Eliza reached him halfway down the trail. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head. She looked past him. "What happened?" "Just a warning." Later that day, the town buzzed with nervous energy. Someone had seen Eliza running. Someone else had heard that one of Sutter's men had been shot. Rumors twisted like weeds through fence. Nash had killed 3 men. No, 5. No, he'd vanished. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. He was still here, and he wasn't afraid. By dusk, the preacher knocked on Eliza's door. He looked ashamed, hat in hand. "I've been meaning to talk to you." She opened the door only partway. "About what?" "Your husband. I read something I think you should see." He handed her a weathered envelope. Micah left it with me before everything. Eliza opened it that night, hands trembling. Inside was a folded page and a pressed sprig of sage. If something happens to me, go to Nash Calla. He'll protect you better than I ever could. And if he stays, let him build something better in my place. Forgive this broken world. And don't